Welcome learners in the another session on the course Psychology for Living. In this session we are going forward with the previous understanding of concept of emotion. In this session we are going to deal with the topic which is called awareness and regulations of emotions. So far we have discussed about the emotions, their components, their process part, their functions part. Now we need to understand how the emotional awareness and regulation is important to us and how it's actually influence our life. So as far as the emotion is concerned, we know that emotion is a complex psychological state involving basically three components. One is the subjective experience, which is known as the feeling part. Then the second is the physiological arousal, which is called bodily reaction, the second part, and the third one is the behavioral expression, which is also we can say our action. So emotion is nothing but it's a combination of subjective experience, physiological arousal and behavioral expression. So in a simple way we can say when you experience emotion can have three things together. One, what is your subjective experience and how you are experiencing in terms of the physiological changes, physiological arousal within you, and how you are expressing those emotions in terms of action. For example, when you see a snake, you may feel fear or heartbeat gets fast, or you may run away from the situation. So it is because the emotion is having a functions of survival. So either we can fight with the stimuli, or we can flight with the stimuli, or we can have a kind of tendency to adjust with the environment if the stimulus is very dangerous to us, so or which create a fear within us, and we try to make it lesser, or we can reduce our fear only when we escape from the environment, or either we can defend with the environment. So with this we can say that emotion is a combinations of three things. Again, one is subjective experience, physiological arousal and behavioral expression. So the purpose of these things emotion is to understand emotion is to how emotions influence how we think, how we behave and how we interact with the others. That the emotion is one of the things that influence in all three dimensions of our life. Our thinking life or thinking pattern, it also influence our behavior, it also influence how we are going to interact with others. So the awareness of emotion is going to be very important, especially when we see that how we behave and how we interact with others. Do we interact with others very effectively, and whenever we encounter with some stressful situation, how we react in those situations, it depends upon how much you are aware about your emotions. And definitely once you become aware about your emotion, you will be in position to regulate them very effectively. So they prepare the body for the quick actions and guide for the decision making. So basically emotions prepare the body for quick action that is required at the particular situation, and also guide for the decision making that has to be taken in a particular situation as per the demand. So the emotional awareness, when we say it is something, is the ability to identify, understand and level of your emotions, but others emotions as well. So when we say awareness, it comprises three things: identify emotions, understand emotions, as well as we have to give them a level. Not only to identify the emotion, but we also have to understand them. Recognition is not enough, but understanding the emotion is also equally important in terms of emotional awareness, and we have to give them level as well. For steps of emotional awareness can be explained like this. First, what we do? First, we recognize the emotion. What emotions you are feeling, that is the part of your recognitions. So once you recognize, then the second steps comes, which is called understanding step. So in understanding a step, you experience why you are feeling something emotions. Like suppose when you recognize certain kind of emotion, then you ask yourself why you are feeling like that. Then the third steps comes, which is notice step. in which how it affects your thoughts and behavior will actually analyze. And the last, which is acknowledgement kind of things, where you acknowledge the emotion without any judgment. So when we say emotional awareness, which comprises 4 steps, one is recognition of emotion, then understanding of emotion, then noticing of emotion, and at the end we acknowledge those emotions. So for example, I feel anxious because the tomorrow is my exam and my hands are sweating and I am thinking about I am going to fail, I am not going to pass the examination. So all these things are basically a reflection of your emotional awareness. So suppose for example, you feel anxious, but you don't know why you are feeling anxious. It means you are not emotionally aware. You are recognizing your emotion, that emotion is anxiousness, that is your emotion, but you are not able to understand why it is there, why you are feeling anxious. So the questions of emotional awareness is like this. It's not only the recognition, but it is also comprises understanding part, noticing part, and acknowledging part. So why emotional awareness is important? Because it improves self understanding, prevent impulsive actions, as also it builds empathy and healthy communications with others. So it has a good functions. Once you become emotionally aware, you will be able to improve your understanding what you are, and also you will be in position to prevent yourself with the impulsive reactions, and you would be in position to communicate healthy with others. So for example, if you think like just for your practice, if you want to see how much you are emotionally aware, you can just name 3 emotions that you felt today, and you also have to answer what triggered them. Means you have to just write down 3 emotions that you felt today, and what are the reason behind it, that will give you a understanding part. And did you recognize them, did you acknowledge them, that you also have to write, and accordingly you can understand how much you are we can say emotionally aware. Then the second part that comes, which is called the regulation part. Once we know the emotion, then we are aware about the emotions, then how we regulate the emotions. So emotional regulation is the ability to manage and express emotion in a healthy, appropriate way. Not only to manage, whenever it requires, you express them in a very healthy and appropriate way as per the situation. It does not mean that you have to suppress your emotion. It means that you are handling them very wisely. So emotion regulation does not mean you have to suppress the emotions that you don't want, but you are in position to handle them very wisely. So what would be the strategy of emotional regulations, you can say? So the first things that you can say you can do, or we can say in terms of a strategy, you can do first thing like pause and take breath before reacting of any situation. So when you take a pause, you will have a sufficient time to analyze them, to regulate them, as well as to recognize them. Without having recognition, when you react, that the reaction would not be very appropriate. The very first strategy to take a pause and breathe before reacting. Then the cognitive reappraisal is also one of the strategies that we can do. Change the way you think about any situation. Like maybe your friend did not mean it to hurt me, but you are experiencing like the friend hurted me. It is one of the experience that you can interpret differently, like maybe friend did not mean to hurt me. That is the reappraisal of the same situation, cognitive reappraisal, through which you can also handle your emotion, regulate your emotion effectively. Another strategy that you can apply, which is called mindfulness and relaxation technique, or we can say strategy. So notice your emotion very calmly, what you are experiencing emotion, you and without having any judgment. So non-judgmental understanding or evaluation of your emotion could also help you to regulate your emotion effectively. Then problem solving, take a practical step, that how you handle the situation, what are the cause of situation, why it is happening, then you can also regulate your emotion very effectively. Expressive writing is one of the another technique, or expressive talking is also one of the technique through which we also regulate our emotion. So, how we express, how do we go for the expressive writing? We can maintain journaling, and we can also share certain emotions with others. So, what are the importance of these regulations of emotion? The first, the keep emotion very balanced. The importance is like that when you are able to regulate your emotion, you can be easily keep your emotions very balanced and promote mental well-being, and it will also help you to improve your decision making and the relationship. So generally what happens when we experience anger, we shouting others. So instead of shouting when you are angry, take a deep breath and speak later with calm with the individual with whom you have some anger kind of emotions. So taking pause and breathe would also give you a space and time to become aware about the emotions and also to regulate them. So in emotion awareness and regulation, there are certain psychologists who have worked a lot, and we can say certain theory that comes into the picture through which we can understand the basic behind the emotion regulation. One component which is very prominent, important in order to understand the emotion regulation is called emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence concept derived by the Daniel Goleman in 1995, and as far as the definition of emotional intelligence, so is the ability to recognize, understand, manage our own emotions, and to recognize and influence others' emotions at the same time. So you have to understand and manage your own emotions, and also to recognize and influence others' emotion at the same time. So emotional intelligence basically having 5 components. One is called self-awareness, knowing your emotions. It indicates that you are self-aware about yourself. Then the self-regulations, the managing your impulses and emotions is the self-regulation. So as far as the third component of the emotional intelligence is like motivation. Using your emotion to achieve your goal is also one of the component of emotional intelligence. Then one component could be empathy. Empathy is also is one of the component of emotional intelligence through which we understand others' emotion. Sometimes we understand our own emotion, but would not be able to understand others' emotion. So understanding others' emotion will also make you more emotionally intelligent. So it is one of the component of emotional intelligence, and the last one is the social skills. So managing relations effectively will indicates that how much you are emotional intelligence. So in relation to the emotional awareness and regulation, emotional intelligence basically combined both being aware of emotions, which is called self-awareness, and handling them effectively, which is regulation. So emotion regulations and emotional awareness, both things you will see in emotional intelligence, that has been discussed by Daniel Goleman in 1995. So for example, a teacher stay calm with all a noisy environment in the class instead of shouting. So this shows that a very high intelligence, emotional intelligence within the teacher. So irrespective of the fact the class is very noisy and the teacher is not reacting immediately, but taking pause and behaving very calm, it indicates that the person is aware of the others' emotions as well. So as far as the emotional intelligence is concerned, you can also do some activity when like for example, you can imagine when was the last time you used emotional control to handle your tough situation, that indicates that how much you are emotionally intelligent. So this activity will give you opportunity to understand your emotional regulation, awareness, and especially emotional intelligence. To understand emotion regulations and emotion awareness, we can also discuss a cognitive arousal theory which has been given by Satcher and Singer in 1962, also known as the two-factor theory. Two-factor theory talks about emotion is nothing but it's a combination of physiological arousal and cognitive level. So we feel emotion only when we experience physiological arousal, which is bodily changes that take place, and we label that arousal based on the situation. So you can see in cognitive arousal theory, the two-factor theory of emotions, Satcher and Singer has stated about the emotion is a combination of physiological arousal at the cognitive level. So, when we experience physiological arousal, accordingly we label those arousal and based on the situation, and we experience emotions. So, for example, you are trembling and you see a barking dog, you label it as a fear. If you are trembling in the exciting game, then you label it as excitement, not fear. So, the situation in both the situation are different, though the physiological arousal was same. Trembling was the experience or the physiological arousal, but you label them differently as per the situation. So, in one condition you experience fear, in another condition you experience excitement. So, implication of emotion regulation in these theories, you can say, if we change the interpretation or label part of a situation, we can change how we feel. So, labeling is one of the important part through which you can also regulate your emotions. So, reappraisal help you to regulate your emotion, that also. So, in short we can say the emotions depend not just on what our body feels, but on what and how our mind interpret it. So, the interpretation part will make you will make you compatible in order to regulate the emotions, and once you are aware about it, you will definitely manage them very perfectly. One theory which is also very common, which is called cognitive mediation theory, mediational theory, which is given by Lazarus in 1991. The cognitive mediational theory talks about our thinking appraisal comes before emotions. How we apprise our thinking, accordingly we experience emotions. So, according to this theory, we first evaluate a situation, then we feel the emotion, then we react. So, there are 3 steps process in which first we evaluate the situation, then we feel the emotion, and accordingly we react. So, the process is like appraisal. First, the evaluation part. Is the situation harmful or helpful to me? Then we answer these questions, emotions, yes, it is there or not. The feeling arises, maybe it can be fear, it can be joy, it can be anger. So, if the situation is not harmful, then we can joy. If the situation is harmful, we can have a fear emotions. So, the physiological reaction, body changes follows accordingly, and we experience emotion accordingly. So, appraisal first take place, then emotion experience take place, then the physiological reaction take place. So, cognitive mediational theory of the Lazarus, which has explained the emotion in a different way. So, for example, if you see a dog, if your appraisal is like this, you apprise them, it is a dangerous, then you will feel fear. If you apprise it is a friendly, you feel joy. So, in this case you can understand how emotion is experienced by individual, not because of the only physiological changes. The physiological changes take place at the end. According to the cognitive mediational theory of Lazarus, it takes place first appraisal, then emotional, then physiological changes. So, as far as this theory has importance in terms of awareness and regulation, awareness is like noticing, giving appraisal is one of the things through which we can be aware about the emotion. As far as the regulation is concerned, it is a changing of appraisal will give you opportunity to regulate them. So, awareness and regulation, both things comes in this theory in terms of awareness, noticing or appraisal could be a part, whereas regulation, changing of appraisal would be a part. So, in short we can say the way we think about events decide how we feel about them. So, thinking will decide our experience of emotions. So, cognitive mediational theory given by Lazarus will also give a kind of information that how we can regulate our emotions. So, we can regulate emotions effectively with the help of appraisal, then we can go with the emotional part, then we can go for the physiological reaction part. So, when we say about emotional awareness and regulation, there are certain things that we need to understand. So, emotions are a natural responses that includes feeling, body changes and expression, and the second is our awareness, which is help us to recognize emotion. regulation that help us to manage them effectively, then emotional intelligence, which is a combination of both awareness and control. And when we go with the Sachin and Singer theory, which shows that labeling of arousal affects the emotions, and Lazarus theory talks about, shows that the appraisal comes before the emotions. In short, we can say a discussions can be take place in terms to understand the emotion awareness and emotion regulation. Why it is important to understand our emotion before reacting? This is a kind of question through which we can understand, and we can get answer why emotion regulation and awareness are important for us. Because emotion influence our thinking pattern and also influence the action that we do, that we perform, that we behave. So emotions is very important in order to understand them, to recognize them, and accordingly we react them. Can emotion ever be wrong? This is a kind of question that you ask, and you can get answer accordingly. You will see that yes, it can be sometime wrong, and how wrong in the sense it cannot be appropriate as per the situation, because you are not able to label them perfectly. If you are not able to recognize them perfectly, then definitely you will react, you will have experience differently, and which is not required in a particular situation. So in line with the situation, if your emotions are there, then definitely you can have situations where you can understand the emotion is appropriate or not. How can changing your thoughts and change your emotion? That can be also understand with this discussion, in which we have seen like emotion awareness and emotion regulations are the way through which we can regulate our emotions, are the way through which we can understand our thinking pattern. When we change our thinking pattern, when we change our thoughts, it also change our emotions. So there are certain activities that you can also perform. So whenever you do something, when you react with the situation, take a pause and label them. So you can ask yourself to close your eye and in a minute and notice what emotions you are feeling right now and give it name. And by doing this, you will be able to understand, recognize, and aware of your emotions. Once you become aware about your emotion, you will be in position to regulate them. So with this, you can understand what emotion regulation and awareness is all about, and without knowing the emotion, you would not be in position to become aware about them, and once you become aware about the emotion, you can easily regulate them. So regulation, why regulation is important? Regulation is not only the things that we do for ourselves, but also it influence others. How you express your emotion will also influence other persons. So if your emotion is not appropriate as per the situation, the other person would recognize differently, and you will face difficulty in order to communicate with them. So in order to make a good social relationship, to communicate with others effectively, and to deal with the different situation, you must have a quality of emotion regulation. And emotion regulation can also be club with can be understand easily with the emotional intelligence. Though emotional awareness and regulation, both things comes together in emotional intelligence, where the emotional intelligence also talks about how you perceive others and how you perceive emotions of others, where the empathy component is also one of them. With this, I would like to end this session, and I hope you have understand the concept of emotion as well as how we become aware of the emotion and also regulate the emotion. With these things, you can have a clear understanding about emotion awareness and regulation. You may take help of the different study material in order to understand this concept in a very extensive way. With this, I would like to thank you so much.